There's a competency crisis in America. We all know it's true, so we're checking in with D.C. denizen and longtime writer Chris Bedford. I'm James Poulos. Welcome to Zero Hour. In the swamp, but not of it, Chris Bedford is a writer based in Washington, D.C. His work has been featured in The Telegraph, The American Mind, and so very many more. Welcome, Chris.
Good to be here. I like the new set.
Thank you. Well, everything's falling apart, offset at least.
It is.
You've been floating around D.C., plumbing its dark depths for some time now. Just how
20
bad?
years.
Just how bad is it out there?
Worse than I've ever seen it.
Worse than ever?
No, there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, one, when I moved to D.C. in 2004, there was still a lot of kind of like no-go areas. If you wanted to go see a punk rock show, you had to go to a part of town where there was an AIDS clinic, a bunch of vacant lots where people sold stuff that they'd stolen. And it was kind of sketchy, and you knew that. But now places...
DC9, it was a great venue.
Yeah. Now 14th Street is a place where CNN reporters go to have dinner, where the president and his wife go to have dinner. And when people start shooting there, then it gets bad quickly. And I bought a house in Capitol Hill in 2018, in kind of a developing part of Capitol Hill, right near the stadium. And it was all young families. It was a vibrant community. By the time I left to move to Virginia in 2021, every single officer in our Knights of Columbus chapter had left with their whole families. These were all parents who were trying to get the school going again, contributing. Everyone had left, and I think there's been about 3 shootings within a block of my house in the last month, because they're just not afraid of the police. And it's not like DC or other cities in America have been hit by some massive global depression. It's not like a real actual disease has swept through and broken down law and order. This is intentional suicide by our city council. And the mayor originally backed it up because it was part of owning Donald Trump was destroying your cities. And now she's regretting it because she's kind of just like she likes to make money. She's a bureaucrat. She wants businesses to thrive. But DC, it might be too late. And I think it probably will get better because you can't really abandon DC, but it's going to take a long time.
Well, the city's abandoning its residents, and it seems like, I was just up there doing some fun stuff, quote-unquote fun for us crazy masochists in the media business. Residents just seem totally demoralized. They've resigned themselves to the fact that all the retail's closing up. I tried to buy a pair of shoes at Johnston & Murphy. It was closed at 2 p.m., middle of working hours, all the lights were on, nobody's home. Are people giving up?
Yeah, the federal bureaucrats have refused to come back to work. The government's refused to make them go back to work. Now, that's like generally fine. If you live in most parts of the country, you think, who cares? But if you live in downtown D.C., it's kind of a disaster because that's the lunches, that's the restaurants, that's the shopping. You combine that with massive levels of retail theft, which has made headlines in places like California, but is happening also in Washington, D.C. There's parts of it at City Center where they've used to have some luxury stores. You're crazy to open up a luxury store. And so much has changed about the way that the city responds. I remember I was a bouncer at a bar in Georgetown in maybe 2007 or so.
Why am I not surprised?
And there was a spate of crime in Georgetown. One, a jeweler was shot in the head in a full daylight robbery. And the second one, a British exchange student walking with his girlfriend tried to defend her from a sexual assault and was murdered for it. And the response from the police was, you don't do this in Georgetown. And they ended up putting roadblocks around some of the neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. They had a curfew for anyone under 18. I remember because I was still going to concerts back then, and all the kids had to leave before they get arrested by the cops. And nowadays, if you complain about it, I'm on some neighborhood listservs where people talk about, hey, this city's going to hell. Have you noticed the shootings? Have you noticed the crime? And folks get angry at them. They say, how dare you? This is part of living in the city. They have this weird self-loathing liberalism about them that just says it's part of the city. It's the local culture to rob people and murder people and use drugs and blast your music. How dare you
deserve
complain?
this.
Yeah. It's so wild.
You know who's having a great time in D.C. is Barack Obama. resident Barack Obama.
Yeah,
you're not supposed to.
Colorado.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be living in D.C. and doing whatever he does in that mansion. It violated many decades of precedent of you're supposed to bug out of town once you're out of office.
He's still in charge.
Yeah, he seems to still be in charge. You don't need to indulge in the conspiracy theories in order to recognize that that the guy is not just sitting at home doing the crossword puzzle.
So we need to do that with Blaze. I mean, in DC has this thing where like the newest, hippest restaurants, like things you'd never want to eat, like French, Filipino, street food fusion, they don't take reservations. You have to pay homeless people to wait in line for you. But the Blaze should pay some homeless people to just hang out in front of Obama's house and just keep track of who's coming, who's going, because he has full access to the White House. He's holding meetings whenever he wants. He's on phone calls, and visitors are coming to and from that Colorado Heights mansion. And I kind of just want to know, like, which aspects of the White House are being run by him.
Yeah,
You can
I
probably
think a
get
lot
that
of
list.
people want to know that.
Maybe
I think lots of
maybe
people want to know, and nobody knows.
I'll hang out in the corner for you guys.
Yeah, would you? Would you do that? Go out
taking
there?
pictures, writing things down.
I remember back when Christopher Hitchens was still around, he got a bunch of people together out in front of Hillary Clinton's house in D.C. and stood up on a little stone and death to fascism and so we can do the same thing. We can do the same thing to Obama. He's supposed to be a competent guy. That was the rap on Obama. He was Mr. No Drama Obama and he prided himself on having a nice, smoothly running White House. How do you think he feels about D.C.? Does he care?
You wouldn't really care if you lived in Colorado.
Yeah.
That area of D.C. is very nice, very wealthy. Vagrants would be easy to spot if you're surrounded by Secret Service. You're protected. Although, the carjackings have been spreading to that area. It's starting to hit, you started to see it hitting Georgetown, nearby areas. But if you're that wealthy and you have that level of security, you're so insulated from anything that actually hits normal people. I would be shocked if his children, when they're visiting home, have heard gunshots, have woken them up at night.
Yeah. Our President Barack Obama, as I sometimes refer to him, if he's really in charge, then why does this administration seem so dysfunctional? Do you think there are like factions grappling for control?
There
over
always
the White House?
are, right?
Yeah.
There always are. And this administration, I think, is less competent, but it's also kind of Barack Obama's third term. And while Obama spoke in the language of Ronald Reagan, kind of spoke in this somewhat conservative-leaning American tradition style, if you were to listen to any one of his State of the Unions, you'd come away thinking, oh, this guy seems reasonable. I kind of like this guy. But his policies were significantly more radical. And I think what we're dealing with, what the Democratic Party is dealing with, is the clown show he invited in. I mean, he started as the great unifier. Everyone was excited. Republican voters, I think, were cautiously optimistic. Like, maybe this is a turning point for America. Maybe we can put a lot of this pain behind us. And it turned out he was not interested in that. He was actually interested in making it worse. And racial grievances exploded. The idea amongst Black Americans and white Americans that racism was going in the wrong direction in this country skyrocketed over those years. And people kind of forget, but by the end of his term, like the last few months of his second term, it was so dystopian. I mean, you had illegal immigrants in the White House shouting down the president, yelling at him, "How dare you, you're not doing enough." No, it's hard to get into the White House. So these people were let in by the president to heckle him and scream at him. Now, I remember, I think, one of the last press conferences that was given at that White House, the reporters were repeatedly clamoring for, well, what are you going to do about disinformation? And the press secretary had to continuously remind reporters that the First Amendment bars the White House from actually censoring people and stopping Trump from speaking. Now, liberals have gotten over that kind of like quaint idea that they can't stop people from speaking. Now they're kind of full bore into it. But it was strange at the end, and you've got this coalition where you've got black race radicals, illegal immigrant advocates, like basically every citizen of every country except for our country. The U.S. Constitution was written by Emma Lazarus. And the radical socialist groups, and they don't get along. And they certainly don't get along. And you get the Greenies. They certainly don't get along with labor. They don't get along with working class white people at all, really working class anyone. And I think a good example you can see of this was the disaster in East Palestine, where the railroads essentially accidentally nuked a town. And this seems like it would just be perfect bread and butter Democrat issue. There, you've got regulation problems. You've got a corrupt industry that has an incredible amount of power in Washington, D.C., the trains. You've got environmental regulations. You've got a chance to reach out to working people who are suffering. And they couldn't do it. I think it's probably because maybe people like Joe Biden still have the political instincts to know we should do this, we should care about these people. But a lot of the elite staff of the White House really, truly, like in their bones, do not care about working people. And they couldn't bring themselves to even do just a PR stunt. just go there and give a speech, kiss some babies, shake some hands, walk around looking sad. You don't actually have to do anything as president there. It just appear, and they couldn't bring themselves to do it because they have such disdain for us.
And it's just so painful looking at the way that they prey on the better angels of our nature, whether it's the promise of Barack Obama, first black president, come on, if we can't rally behind this, then what are we doing? This is America. Same drill with Joe Biden. Obviously not a black guy, but no, we're going to go back to normal. Everything's going to calm down. We're going to lower the temperature.
The uniter in chief.
Right. Maybe he's a little too old, but we just got to get through it. It's been a crazy, tumultuous 4 years. We're going to get Biden in there. Everything's just kind of going to settle back down. Lies. That was never the plan.
I think it was a commentator on MSNBC who referred to the lights around the Washington Monument on Inauguration Day as feeling like Joe Biden's arms embracing the nation.
Yeah.
And, I think people have realized this too. Like, we were talking about this at dinner last night, but it's kind of cool to like Trump now. They tried to make it really evil. It's morally reprehensible to like Donald Trump. And I think people are more easily admitting it now because he's been gone from office for a couple of years. You're starting to realize that Trump wasn't the originator of the chaos. I mean, the reason why the president was fighting with Major League Baseball and fighting with Disney and fighting with commerce, and fighting with NATO, and fighting with Europe, and fighting with Canada, and fighting with Mexico, is because all of those groups and forces were attacking the United States and attacking its interests. The culture war, you got people like Mitch McConnell who say we need a truce in the culture war. That's so dumb. The culture war is not an offensive action. This is not the 1970s where the cops are raiding Stonewall. The culture war at this point is completely a defensive action. The aggressors are in Christians' trenches. There's no ceasefire.
Stonewall is now the cops.
Yes, Stonewall, exactly, is now the cops. Stonewall Day, that's another one of the special proclamations that the president gets to sign, along with Trans Visibility Day and Coming Out Day. They've won, and the Christians in this country are in full retreat, full defensive action. So when you turn around and stop retreating, it seems like you're suddenly surrounded and there's chaos everywhere. So now Trump's gone, and it's continued. The insanity has continued in the American streets, and people so many of the crises, so many of the freakouts, so many of the flip-outs that the press would have on a daily basis about Donald Trump were so surface level, or so invented, or so just matters of style and opinion. Like, yeah, he was crude. He was also probably the funniest president America's ever had. That when you look back and you ask people, why did you hate Trump so much? They kind of struggle to answer because they might say, well, the border. Yeah. But they can't really say that anymore because now everyone knows, even in Washington, D.C., that the border is a disaster. Even in New York City and Chicago, you know that. So what did you hate about Donald Trump? I mean, he strengthened NATO. He kept us out of wars. What exactly is the problem? And it seemed like during his administration, it was a massive, explosive scandal every day. But none of them mattered. So it's hard, even as a professional who covers this, to recall almost any of them.
I want to circle back to Trump and McConnell for that matter in a bit, but just to sort of dot the I on the way that the American people, the electorate, is just kind of duped repeatedly. Promises of unity, it ends up falling apart. How much of that goes back to the Clintons? You got Bill Clinton, Mr. Triangulation. It's the 90s. He's coming out of his first term as a sort of weak, young, really unsuccessful first-term president, and he makes some course corrections, changes the rhetoric, changes the policies. We're going to end welfare as we know it, really moves himself in a direction that makes kind of, Republicans who want to feel like they're participating in the normalcy and unity of America that they crave from the Reagan years. And a lot of those people did vote for Bill Clinton. Does he bear responsibility for beginning that kind of bait and switch?
That's an interesting one. I was just rewatching a Bill Clinton versus Bob Dole campaign ad the other day, because this is how Democrats used to do it, as he used to do it. He's kind of like the new Labor Democrat. And he neutered Republicans on so many different issues.
Yeah.
He allowed them to balance the budget. He did the welfare reform. He said in the State of the Union, the era of big government is over. He talked about tough policing. You had Hillary Clinton out there talking about super predators. He married that to gun control in a way that liberals seem incapable of doing now. They can only do gun control. And he tried to attach Newt Gingrich to Bob Dole. It's like you're going to have a Newt Gingrich Congress, and they're going to take away, America's sacred right to abortion. And it was intelligent. And the 90s were that kind of break from history, and people liked it. Of course, you look at that and you remember things were good. Like Bill Clinton, I think there's probably a lot of nostalgia for the Clinton presidency. But there was a bit of a bait and switch where a lot of his policies were rather liberal. They're kind of Trump policies of today, like Republican policies. But there was a bit of that undermining. I think it got much worse under Barack Obama. And like you said, the big weapon that they take advantage of is Americans have boundless empathy. My grandfather was second in command of a United Fruit Company plantation down in Central America. He just did the financing and the numbers. And even though that company ran banana plantations, was in charge, was based out of Boston, they had a rule that only Englishmen could ever be in charge of any of these plantations because Americans have this empathy where it's like we sympathize with the local population. We feel like the underdog. We want to take the side of the underdog. And there's no way the English thought, probably correctly, that an American had the firm will to run one of these banana plantations like an Englishman could. And that empathy goes, I think, way back in this country to the settlers, to a lot of people who are rejected, to those folks who went out west for land, who hacked it out. We have empathy for the immigrant, for the struggling masses. But that has been really taken advantage of by the American left. You started off with a lot of the trans stuff, with the love is love stuff, which is why is it your business? Everyone's got someone everyone knows someone or has someone in their family who's going through these disordered longings. Who are you to stand in the way of their happiness? And we kind of just say yes. Or what skin is it off your back to use the proper pronouns? It makes them feel good.
Well, this is Obama again, where he was against gay marriage, and then he was evolving, and now evolving his gender identity.
Yeah, it is. And before you know it, it's why don't you just put on a mask when you're walking outside? It keeps other people safe. We're all in this together. And we've just slowly, we're the frogs in the boiling water. It's just been getting hotter and hotter. And before you know it, I cannot believe this. I would not have believed this in 2019. That before you knew it, the United States government had shuttered our churches, shut down our businesses, closed down our towns, kept people from their dying parents and dying spouses, ended burials. And we all just nodded and said, of course, it's not the politician's fault. It's not the mayor's fault. It's not the council's fault. It's a disease. We're all in this together. And that was just such a huge lie. And I got a little blackpilled during those years because I realized that a lot of the American spirit that had existed, the kind of rebellious spirit, was choosing deaths of despair as opposed to acts of rebellion in response.
A lot of people felt that way.
It was dark.
And it was all done in the name of social solidarity.
Yeah.
It was all done in the name of Hillary Clinton's campaign. Stronger together, guys. And this was, you go back to Bill again, and he's got a new book out, so I'm going to talk about him. It's a 2-for-1 deal. That was kind of the joke that wasn't a joke about you vote for me and you get Hillary too. And by the time she came along and she was running for president, it wasn't triangulation. It was stronger together. It was emotional communism. And that spirit is what took over during COVID.
That was a great night. I was at Facebook headquarters in New York City as the election started to turn. And this was back when Facebook was still playing nice patty cake with conservative media.
Oh, Zuck got punished for that.
Yeah, he
still
did.
Getting punished.
And he really did nothing wrong, actually. I think he was the least crazy of the social media companies. He really resisted and just ended up running from the radicals on both sides, back and forth. But we're sitting there, and they gave us access to this, one of the big boards, election night big boards, which was so much fun. Pull the states around and expand things. And we're walking through, and it suddenly starts to shift, and you see the Florida vote going that way, and the Panhandle. And Blake Neff, who was with me, we were at the Daily Caller, looks straight into the camera and says, it's happening. And you could see this just gloom and despair spreading through the office, the Facebook office. And then we get out, and we were supposed to be covering the Hillary Clinton campaign that night, but they wouldn't let us in, even though we had press passes. They're like, oh, yeah, you have to get in line with thousands of other people because they didn't like the Daily Caller. We just went down there and interviewed folks on the street outside the Javits Center, and it was like the scenes you see after a bomb has gone off. There's just, without the shattered glass, just people lying in the street, sobbing, walking around, completely befuddled, totally in despair. And we filmed them in that vulnerable moment and asked them questions, and they answered with crazy things, of course. It was one heck of a night.
What was incredible about that moment, too, was this was before any of the true, like, concerted demonization of Donald Trump had really begun in earnest.
It was overnight.
Yeah.
The night before, I had gotten a Trump hat at one of the rallies, and I used to be a punk rocker. Like, you could...
You're not still a punk rocker?
I still am, but
down?
I don't have chaos spikes, and my pants don't embarrass my parents as much sometimes, duck pants. And they don't fit into my leather jacket. But you got angrier stares ever, anytime, wearing that Donald Trump hat than you ever did walking around with like a jacket that told people to F off on the back.
Sure. You can wear anarchy on your leather
totally
jacket.
Fine.
People are like, yeah.
But one of my neighbors put a Trump sign in their front yard on Capitol Hill, and people the night before the election would take pictures in front of it. They thought it was funny. It was like, look at this, it's so weird.
Right.
There was only maybe 3 or 4% or maybe 5% of DC voted for Donald Trump, so it's not really a threatening faction of people. The day before, we were going up on Amtrak, the day before Election Day, and the sun was in my eyes, so I wasn't a campaign partisan, but I took out the hat and I put it on, and people thought it was funny. I was like, I'm going to wear this around DC and see what happens. And I noticed that, like, I'd walk into a bar, you take off your hat when you walk indoors, and the finance bros would yell, put that hat back on. And we were leaving a steakhouse that night, and some woman asked Tucker Carlson, said, hey, can you take a picture of me with this guy? They had no idea who he was. So there's somewhere out there that picture exists. And you'd walk by, and you'd try to be, all these reporters were running around trying to find Trump supporters just to interview them because it was such an anomaly, and this was the last day. Politico's playbook that morning, they opened up with, what's the catering situations for the different newsrooms? It was like celebratory. We're about to stand with her. And I remember the reporters going around looking for these Trump supporters. And I walked up to the police officers who were everywhere, and none of the reporters were talking to them. Black police officers, Hispanic police officers, Irish. And I said, are there any Trump supporters amongst the blue? And they would just laugh and nod and say things like, well, I couldn't possibly comment on that. But the press was surrounded by Trump supporters. They just didn't even think to ask them. But that changed overnight. I mean, the next day, after the Javits Center, we went back to the hotel room. Next day, everyone was exhausted. I think we worked till 3 a.m. And I'm bringing my tired, kind of hungover news team to the train station and to get some pizza. And I'm wearing that MAGA hat. And this woman runs up in the street and slaps me in the face, knocks my glasses off, steals the hat, and starts screaming, you Nazi.
And you turned to the camera and said, it's happening.
It's happening. And immediately, this young man runs up to confront me. He's like, you just struck that woman. And a whole crowd gathers around us of people ready to attack. And the sign in my front yard, which had been a novelty before, was ripped out and ripped in half. And overnight, that idea that, oh, look at these quaint guys, they think they're going to mess with the arc of history, which of course bends towards Hillary, became, you are Nazis, you are supporters of the regime. The Daily Caller threw a party with Facebook on inauguration night. There were very few parties, and they were still kind of cautious. And they had such a staff revolt over this that they decided to stop sponsoring political events. DC, like the swamp, drained itself. People didn't want to have the big lavish Christmas parties anymore. No one was in the mood for celebrating. And I remember at the Caller, we thought, well, we're going to be triumphant because our founder just got a major show on Fox, and we have access to this White House. We're going to be breaking news all the time. Advertisers are going to come. This is a great moment. But advertising was weaponized. People stopped wanting to advertise to reach the president because that would be collaboration with the regime. You could print exclusive stories of meaning about what the White House is planning to do. And Politico and the Washington Post would just ignore it, pretend that it wasn't even happening, to try and suffocate you. The social media companies were gone after in a really vicious way. The days of getting invited over to the Huffington Post for beers or having the Daily Beast guys come over to take us on in beer pong were over. You no longer got lunch with other reporters. It was just a very quick shift. And they always imagine themselves like we're on the right side of history. They imagine themselves in this massive fake cosplay of we are the French resistance fighters versus the Nazi regime and the Vichy, and you guys are Nazis. And it's so ridiculous. But it's really toxic, and it poisons the mind.
You've been covering Donald Trump for some time now, almost a student of the Donald, the Art of the Donald book of yours.
Yes, sir.
Came out 2017, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I got it right out, like under a deadline. Lessons from America's Philosopher-in-Chief. A very good Father's Day gift.
Yeah. So let's size him up. Is the magic still going to work? Where does he stand in your mind relative to where he was then?
Yeah. I think it's different. When he first ran for office, he was unexpected. It was something that the American people had never seen televised. I mean, I don't really have any footage of how Andrew Jackson carried himself. I imagine it was somewhat similar. There's very little of Teddy Roosevelt. But Donald Trump, I think Shane Gillis says it well. It was kind of like watching World Wrestling, just hitting these nerds with chairs up there on the stage and saying things that Republicans would never say. I mean, I remember the Las Vegas debate was just incredible, where he went out, and this is a guy who like almost certainly had never thought seriously or deeply about what abortion was. But obviously someone just before the debate had gotten to him and shown him like, hey, do you know what this is? It's not just, it's easy to just dismiss it. Who knows? It wouldn't shock me if it turned out a guy like him had paid for these before, but never actually thought about it. And he goes out on stage and starts explaining to the crowd with this, like, do you understand what this woman is talking about? She's a nasty, nasty woman. And you'd never seen a Republican nominee talk that openly about that issue and go on the offensive and say, you have to defend this radicalism. And that Trump hasn't really changed that much. You don't, when you're an 80-year-old billionaire, you don't really learn that many new tricks.
Yeah.
But I have noticed that the lawfare has quieted him down. He is not as outspoken and firing off quite as much as he used to. Obviously, the finances have been strained to a breaking point, Republican finances. So he's not able to do those pretty expensive rallies that they have. You not only have to gas your jet, rent the field, pay, I mean, the levels of payment, the porta potties, the security. You have to get insurance on different parking lots, like in case somebody falls in that parking lot. I remember talking to a high-level guy at the RNC who was dealing with a rally in the 2020 election, and they were having phone calls. This guy won't let us put cars here because he says we haven't shown him proof of our car insurance policy. They're expensive, and that slowed things down. But I think that magic is still there because the liberal media, the corporate media, used every tool to make it as uncool as humanly possible to like Donald Trump. I mean, you were part of that regime. And now if you look around at the comedians, I mean, Bill Burr, Shane Gillis, Dave Chappelle, they're making fun of liberal orthodoxies. I don't think many of them are going to get in line and vote for Donald Trump.
Even The Rock is now out there saying, oh, I regret endorsing Biden and I'm not doing it this time around. There's a change in the air. And, you know, and the internet matters. It matters even more now than it did then. The strategic meme reserve that Donald Trump contributed to is
meme wars.
Still pretty deep. I mean, it's, you know, nasty woman, many such cases. You're telling me this for the first time? Like, the guy is just... He's coined so many of these phrases that have this kind of cultural currency.
2016, it was cool.
Yeah.
In 2024, it's cool again.
Yeah.
It's punk rock again.
Right.
It's resistance. And it's weird what has happened to punk rock. I see these guys now, and they walk around, and they've got their spikes in their hair, but they're all wearing, like, rainbow pins and, like, Joe Biden stickers, and they're wearing masks outside. Yeah. It's the least punk rock. Like, what are you rebelling against? You guys are in charge of everything.
It's painful. So, but the lawfare, I mean, you can't make that go away on the internet just by saying things that everyone wants to repeat. So what do you think? Is he going to survive it?
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, the newest case story breaking this morning, it's kind of wild how these things get so repeated. The oldest article I can find is on NBC, where they're saying, well, Jack Smith, the special counsel in the documents case, could just have the judge removed. And the reason for having this judge removed is the judge hasn't done anything wrong, isn't accused of doing anything wrong, literally hasn't made a decision with which to be removed, but floated the idea that Jack Smith is going to have to argue the case in front of the jurors that they should not consider that Donald Trump is allowed to declassify things if he wants to. He's trying to hide that information from jurors. He says it's not relevant because he's charging them Trump with espionage. The judge said, well, that sounds like an argument for you to make in front of the jurors. And NBC comes up with this genius idea, well, we'll just remove the judge. Now compare that to the cases going on in New York and Washington, D.C., where one of the judges' daughters is literally a fundraiser for Adam Schiff, making money on this case, and no judge gets removed. Compare that with Fani Willis, whose corruption has been exposed, and there's been no removal from this case. But the liberals who are using this lawfare to try and destroy the president, they're doing everything that they claimed he was trying to do, and he never actually did, are having this massive temper tantrum that there's a judge out there who is merely questioning all of their pieties, merely questioning how they're going about this, hasn't even yet stopped them. But I do think, I was talking to my wife before coming on here, and she heads the investigative team at the Washington Examiner and follows these cases like way more closely than I do. And she said she thinks it's kind of fantasy. It's a pipe dream. It's like the 14th Amendment thing. They get themselves really excited with this hypothetical case, but in order to get a judge removed, the judge has to do something wrong, and this judge hasn't done anything.
Well, there is this weirdness because at the same time that they're kind of, it's just everyone's closing ranks, throwing the kitchen sink at Trump. They got 6 ways to Sunday to get to him, as also sort of entered the lexicon. But they're not really sending their best, and the competency crisis is kind of penetrating even into the lawfare. I mean, whether you're talking about Fani Willis or whoever, there's sort of this cast of weird hangers-on and unqualified people in positions of power. That's starting to catch up with them, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's across the board. You see it. It's going on from Boeing to the special prosecutors. This crisis of competency. I mean, did you watch the cross-examination of Fani Willis and her paramour?
Oh, yeah. Madness.
They weren't very good lawyers. I'd be sitting there. It reminded me of like how I would try to argue getting myself in legal trouble in high school. Like, I just kept it in cash. I'm like, you need ATM receipts for that. Like, they hadn't really thought through this stuff. That guy didn't sell it to me. He just gave it to me, kind of thing.
That's the way I roll.
Yeah, that's just how I do it.
Yeah.
It was shocking to see the gross incompetence. And that has kind of been the case for a while. The Federalists used to have a sticker that said, consider the possibility we are led by idiots. And 20 years in Washington, D.C. now, over 20 years, I have learned the really frustrating thing that I think a lot of people experience in their jobs around the world is that the really stupid people and like the corrupt people and just the dumb people don't ever go away. It's not like they get weeded out by some meritocracy. As you rise in the ranks and you take on new jobs, so do they.
Yeah.
And it's kind of surprising when you see a lot of the folks who you watched on television growing up or you watched on TV even now, and you meet them in real life, just how unimpressive they are, how actual little expertise they have really in any subject matter. I knew some of these people. I remember turning on the TV once to see someone I used to work with explaining how Donald Trump making NATO contribute more to its own defense was undermining NATO. And I guarantee you, if I'd asked her a month before that, what NATO stood for, she wouldn't have been able to tell me. But here she is, just confidently asserting this is reality of geopolitics, because it's been told to her.
Yeah.
And the same thing with this dumb remove the judge article. I looked it up because I heard about it. And it wasn't just an NBC anymore. It was at the Washington Post now. And it was at Bloomberg. And it was reprinted by Yahoo. It had just spread like this chain reaction of everyone saying it. Like, maybe it'll be true if we all say it. And maybe it will be, because they've been able, might has made a lot of right in the last couple of years, and they've really shown that in a way that I'm envious of in some ways. They get what they want. But they really would have to come up with at least one reason to remove this judge. And it can't just be that they don't like her.
Yeah, maybe you'll think this is a tough question, maybe not. Donald Trump, older now. You got Shatner out there, age 94. He's doing pretty well. So maybe Trump's got who knows how many more years of active duty left in him. But he has kind of been dogged by certain kinds of competency questions. His first public office, President of the United States. It's not just a tough job. It's a lot of moving parts, and there are these factions in any White House, as you said. There's a theory that sometimes I'm willing to consider, which is things are now so bad that the Dems might actually just kind of want to say, it's Donald Trump's problem now, you deal with it. Does he have what it takes just in terms of the political experience, nuts and bolts of being an office holder, to steer the country through what's coming if he does come back?
That's my worry. And that was, I don't think he's going to make the same mistakes he made the first time. When he first came into office, he was so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
This was really new to him. And he was very impressed by things like the generals. You know, you send in some five-star guy,
Rex
comes in
Tillerson.
his uniform. Yeah.
Oh, he looks like the guy for the job.
You know, I heard a shocking story the other day about how Rex Tillerson got hired. And usually when you choose a secretary, especially something like Secretary of State,
Yeah.
That's a major role, one of the top roles in your government. And Donald Trump and him never even spoke on the phone before he was chosen.
He just saw the name Rex, and he was like, that's my man.
Yeah. We a little bit of Donald Trump's style, his "you're fired" sort of things, didn't really translate to his personnel and his staffing. It was a bit of a clown car.
One does not simply fire the executive branch agencies, unfortunately.
But one thing about his management style that is like exactly as it is on TV in The Apprentice is what he likes to do is sit there, usually with a counselor or two that he trusts, and have different policy ideas argued about. Like, he thinks this, he thinks that, and he asks questions throughout, and he watches them debate and try to see who's going to win, and he maybe listens to a couple pieces of advice and then makes a decision based on that. But he didn't really know how to make a lot of these decisions. Like, you know, an executive order, for example, he'd be like, I'm going to write an executive order. Okay, well, that's a glorified press release. That doesn't actually do things. It just says, it's kind of instructions that someone should somewhere do something. But they have to be direct. You can't just tweet, after consultation with my generals, there'll be no more transgender in the military. That's not how policy is made. It's much more difficult than that. You have to direct your Secretary of Defense to change this policy and then see it through. And Donald Trump wasn't really in the mood at the beginning to be bossing around people like Mad Dog Mattis, the hero. He didn't think that he had to. He just kind of thought he could tweet it and it would happen. And because of things like that, effectively now, when he comes back into office, transgender in the military, which was a midnight last second term of Obama policy, has now been in there it will be there for 8-9 years. So the chances of actually completely changing that are very low. It's going to be much more difficult. A lot of these things are entrenched. And also, the very competent people in his first White House, at least for the first 2 years after his term ended, there's no way that they would go back to doing that again. The hate you receive, the hours you have to work. A lot of them got sued by these left-wing groups. If you didn't buy, some of the folks that I know who decided not to buy the insurance ended up losing tens to $100,000 in legal fees from getting personally sued over these proper and correct decisions. And even those who would want to go back, I think their wives or their husbands would say, "No, you're not doing that again. You're not leaving your job at the firm." But that's actually started to change. I think I've noticed in the last year or two, there's an excitement again. Mm-hmm. Like maybe it could happen again. And it's necessary to happen again. And you have good people working on it. You've got the Project 25 folks led by Heritage Foundation, which has been a bit clustered. It hasn't really put out any actual serious work. It's just more like, seems like a coalitions meeting. And you've got the campaign itself trying to distance itself from that. But there are some serious people trying to work on this. Russ Vought comes to mind as someone who to keep an eye on. And there are folks who are ready to go back into that White House and this time really know what worked against them last time, who worked against them last time, and how to actually make these changes in a way that hopefully will last more than 4 years.
Let's talk about the Hill before we let DC go. Mitch McConnell, you brought up, generally seen as a competent guy for better or for worse. His niece-in-law, I guess, probably assassinated by Tesla in a lake in Texas. Definitely some weirdness there. Mitch is out the door. Where does that leave Congress and specifically the GOP?
It's about time the Mitch McConnell era ended. I mean, basically anyone who's an opponent of Trump tries to wear the cape and carry the shield of Ronald Reagan. which becomes very easy to do when Reagan's long dead and can't argue against that. But the reality is people like him represent the George W. Bush wing of the party. They may have come in the 80s during the heyday of the Reagan years. I mean, Mitch McConnell was literally married on Ronald Reagan's birthday, but that's just like a nerdy political thing to do. It doesn't actually make you a Reaganite. But he came into Senate leadership during the Bush years and became leader during the Bush years. And Bush's main interests were the Iraq War and bailing out Wall Street and amnesty for illegal immigrants. And those were the things that Mitch McConnell embraced. And he was an interesting person. He was a strong negotiator, and Democrats were afraid of him. But he kind of ran a third party in Washington, D.C., like the appropriators. The things he cared about were judges. He had a big judicial project, which in some ways has paid off, but in other ways has been a disaster, because he tells these senators and congressmen, hey, you don't talk about the sticky cultural issues. You don't talk about the destruction of marriage, the destruction of the family, the mass human sacrifice of American children and the abortion mills. You let the courts handle that. And by the way, the courts, it turns out, have been completely incapable of really handling this. You need strong politicians. The result of that is that a lot of Republicans can't even talk about it anymore. They don't know how to talk about it.
Well, Congress delegated almost all its authority to the executive agencies, and then just let the judges figure the rest out. What is Congress actually doing?
This raises money.
Yeah.
And Mitch McConnell jealously fought against campaign finance reform. Mm-hmm. But he had that kind of third party where he would be able to peel off enough. He was an expert at joining Democrat coalitions. He's a coalition builder, but I don't think there's really any that I can think of where he had Democrats join a majority Republican coalition. It was always the other way around. And he was able to do that. And then because of that, he would get the Democrats the votes they needed to pass whatever they were passing. And Mitch McConnell would make the specific asks that Mitch McConnell had, whether it was money for this, money for that, war in Ukraine, and operating this kind of third party outside of American conservatism, outside of American liberalism in a way that didn't really tick off the Democrats, allowed him to wield an outside amount of power. But that power wasn't really used to further the interests of Republican voters. It was used to further the interests of Mitch McConnell. And he saw the writing on the wall. He was actually about to be taken out as leader. You had, after that disaster of the immigration reform and amnesty bill that he tried to push through, Republicans of all stripes were willing to take him on as leader. And I think in order to defend himself and to leave on his own terms, he announced a retirement, because once you've got a retirement coming, you're not going to get kind of normie Republican senators rebelling against you, and the 12 or so conservative Republican senators that have always disliked you will continue to, but they've lost their power to remove you. And he's going to put his guys in, he's going to put his finance guys in, he's going to put his fundraising folks in, and he's got a very tough and mean team of people. I mean, once you cross them in the political world, you're out. And he's going to try and make sure that lasts into the next Republican leadership.
Well, I like to save the best for last on the show, and we can't really talk about competency in the swamp without talking about Joe Biden himself, the clearly the most competent president ever to grace the
devout Catholic
White
president.
House. Yeah. Well, let's start there. Is Joe Biden a fake Catholic?
I think he's I know that he struggles a great deal with his faith. When he was vice president, I would sometimes go to I bartended in the morning, so I'd go to the 5 p.m. Mass. And he would sneak in afterwards, and I'd see him there praying quietly in the back. I know that he goes, and I know that he struggles. But by the time you have Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, D.C., like a liberal politician by any stretch, openly criticizing you on the Sunday show, saying you're a cafeteria Catholic, you're in trouble. And there comes a point in time for every modern president where I start to think confidently, this person is probably going to hell. Takes a minute. This past Easter was the moment when I thought, this president is really toying with damnation. And you hear these people who are not religiously observant constantly talking about how dare you question his faith, how dare you say he's not a devout Catholic, how dare you. They think that the Catholic Church is like a country club. You just pay your membership dues. It's not. It's a life. It's a rigid set of rules and beliefs and morals that are very, very difficult to follow. It's not just like, hey, by the way, you can't get an abortion. Sexual life, eating habits, different aspects of human life, spirituality, how you talk to your children, how you raise your children, what you do on Sundays, what holy days you keep, how you communicate with your wife and husband. These things are laid out by 2,000 years of saints in the church, and you can't just pick and choose without serious risk. And Joe Biden his staff are obviously extremely antagonistic to the faith. And I know that he struggles with it, but he ought to get right with God, because I think he's playing with his soul.
There's sort of like one good Joe Biden meme, and that's where he's got like he's sort of pumping iron with one hand, and he's got like the Pope on the line with the other hand.
Yes.
He's like, "Yes, Holy Father, it's all going according to plan." He pretty much blew that up over Easter, didn't he?
Yeah, that's all. It's all completely destroyed. This trans day of visibility on Easter Sunday. By the way, there's like over a dozen, maybe over 20 different gay days on the American calendar. Most of them don't get presidential proclamations. Trump never issued one. Obama never issued one for these. There's 6 different weeks devoted to different gay things in the American calendar. There's 3 different months. It's not just June. It's also like October and November devoted to this. And there is one most holy day on the planet, the ark of salvation, the delivered promise of God, the sacrifice is over, Christ himself is risen. There's only one of those, one Easter Sunday. And that's the day he decides to sign that proclamation and then go out and gaslight everyone who's upset about it. It's shocking, and it makes me think that this White House, they're just not getting it. They're not making it better. They're so committed to the policies, so committed to the act. It's like, if you get dragged to a dinner party and you just hate somebody's husband and you can't hide it. I feel like this White House has that towards a lot of Christian Americans. They're just beyond pretending anymore. They're not going to do the Barack Obama speeches about we're all Christians, we're all doing this. They've moved beyond it. They're post-Christian. It's pagan America, and it's on full display.
Well, it seemed like even if Biden didn't want to have that exact timing, he wound up stuck with it anyway. He was out there, I didn't do that, but it's your name on the piece of paper, guy. So is he going to make it to November?
Yeah, I think he'll survive. And his State of the Union, it's pretty dark.
Yeah,
pretty wild State of the Union. I watched it in real time.
Pretty shouty.
Yeah, and he's kind of been doing that since I saw him in the campaign trail in 2020 in New Hampshire. And he's, for a long time, has been doing either whispering into the microphone softly or yelling loudly. Like, we're all familiar with this because we all have older relatives. We know what this is. And he's getting like that. But his State of the Union accomplished his number one goal, which was shut the Democrats up about replacing him. The night before the State of the Union, the Democrats, the New York Times, folks in Washington, D.C., Washington Post, were talking about we need a different candidate because this guy's going to lose. He's talking to dead political leaders who've long dead political leaders. He's confusing presidents. He's mixing up Mexico and Egypt on the stage. He's wandering around. It's embarrassing. We can't do this. And then he went out at the State of the Union. I don't know what they gave him. It lasted longer than the normal shots, and he was funny, and he jousted when he wasn't dark and menacing. And he hung around and he shook hands, and that shored up that flank. So he is the nominee. DC likes to play a lot of, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, DC likes to play a lot of parlor games where they talk about, well, we're going to take out Donald Trump at the convention. Wait till you see this speech from Ted Cruz. It's going to be over. And that's really stupid. They're not in charge. The people are generally in charge. Conventions are unwieldy. It's fun to do these parlor politics, but most of that's it's confined to history. It's not going to happen again. And they're doing it now with Joe Biden. Well, they're just going to replace him with the DNC, and I don't see it happen. Remember the last DNC? It was like an empty stage. People were outside in their cars, blinking their lights instead of applauding.
Yeah.
You think that is that like a real functioning actual party convention? Doesn't seem like a party convention.
Well, I regret to inform you that we do need at least a few good men inside the Beltway, so that means you have to stick around and suffer on behalf of us all.
I watch it with binoculars from the other side of the Potomac.
Yeah.
And occasionally launch infiltration missions.
Keep it up. We need you. Chris Bedford, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all the time we got today. So give us the like, give us the subscribe, comment below. Who do you want me to interview? Let me know. Until next time around, I am James Poulos. This is Zero Hour, and may God have mercy on us all.